Of all the live-action adaptations of classic cartoon series, the most fascinating might be the Flintstones, both in terms of its years in development and the final product. The story of its making could probably fill an entire book, with the people who involved in its production, and many writers who contributed jokes and ideas to the script. The idea of doing a live-action film based on the Flintstones started in 1985, when Richard Donner signed on to direct. The Flintstones cartoon was essentially the honeymooner with rock puns, so you can imagine it took a while for them to think of a story that would justify a feature length. Stephen E. D'Souza was the initial writer hired onto the project, and he conceived a story involving Barney inventing a plexiglass-like material, Fred taking partial credit, and Slade and Company trying to profit from it. Meanwhile, there's a dino kibble shortage, and Wilma and Betty trying to put their children in a good school. You can actually find the 1987 draft online pretty easily if you're curious about reading it. Eventually, the script was turned down, and the producers brought in Good Morning Vietnam writer Mitch Markowitz, and he delivered a rather bizarre adaptation where Bedrock falls into a recession and the Flintstones and Rubbles travel through the countryside like something out of The Grapes of Wrath. Not surprisingly, this too was rejected. When Steven Spielberg was directing Always, he told John Goodman he was the perfect choice to play Fred Flintstone, and he bought the rights. At this point, Donner was no longer involved, and Brian Levant was hired to direct in his place. Rather than develop the script the usual way, Levant latched onto the idea that the Flintstones was a sitcom, and hired 32 writers to sit in a room and pitch ideas and jokes together. This caused quite a large headache for the Writers Guild when it came to decide on credits, since so many fingers had been dipped into the Flintstones pot. In the end, D'Souza did end up with a writing credit, along with Tom S. Parker and Jim Genuine. Did the writer's room concept help the finished film? Let's take a look. The first thing one can say about the Flintstones is Levant did manage to make it look like the cartoon. It's about what you'd picture a live-action version of the series to appear like, right down to the opening scene, which is an almost shot-for-shot recreation of the famous cartoon intro. Every single dollar of the budget shows up on screen. These sets are certainly impressive, and believably bring Bedrock to live-action life. Honestly, the only thing missing is the same houses and palm trees appearing in the background over and over again while Fred and Barney are commuting to work. That gag was utilized in D'Souza's 1987 script, but I guess they couldn't figure out a way to portray it visually. The other noteworthy aspect is the casting. Spielberg was certainly correct in his assessment that John Goodman was the perfect choice to play Fred. While Goodman brings more of a Jackie Gleason influence into the role than he does Alan Reed, he still captures Fred in the flesh. Rick Moranis at first seems like an unusual choice for Barney, but he gets the voice and good-natured humor down pretty well. Although this Barney is written a lot smarter than his cartoon counterpart. Elizabeth Perkins is also excellent as Wilma, playing the supportive wife, as well as occasionally getting tired of Fred's shenanigans. Not so successful is Rosie O'Donnell as Betty. I mean, she's trying. She knows how to do Betty's trademark giggle, but she just doesn't fit. Ironically, the 2000 prequel Viva Rock Vegas had the opposite happen. Betty was perfectly cast while everyone else feels off. So the film accurately portrays the look and, for the most part, the characters from the Flintstones. How does the story stack up? Not that great. For the first half of the Flintstones, we get what amount to a collection of scenes. We need to establish the Rubbles adopting Bam Bam, so we got a couple of scenes and a montage of that. We need to recreate the bowling scene, so we get a sequence for that. We need Fred arguing with his mother-in-law, who is played by Elizabeth Taylor, because sure, why not? So we have that. Little by little, the plot progresses, but the film really does feel like a bunch of scenes just sort of stitched together, creating a semblance of a story. The main story essentially revolves around an evil plot by Kyle MacLachlan to get Slade and Company to go completely into using machines over human labor. You know, the Twin Peaks revival had a lot more rock puns than I expected. In all seriousness, this storyline has potential. He goes about this plan by promoting Fred to upper management and then framing him for embezzlement. The film was criticized for being about subjects like corporate fraud, downsizing, and embezzlement, subjects no child is going to give a damn about. The thing is, when hanna-barbera conceived the Flintstones, they intended it as a show for adults. That's why it aired in prime time and was initially sponsored by a cigarette company. Children could watch it, but the episodes tended to revolve heavily around things like marital problems and gambling. It was only later, when the series added Pebbles and Bam Bam, that it became more of a family show. So this plot would not be out of place in the first couple of seasons. The problem is, his plan is so overly complicated and convoluted. The only reason Fred even gets the promotion is because Barney switched aptitude tests with him. So his plan to get somebody really stupid to act as a fall guy involves promoting the caveman with the highest test result? Run that by me again? Barney pretty much gave the villains an advantage. Fred's promotion and higher salary also leads to him becoming pompous and thoroughly unlikable, which feels out of character for him, especially since earlier in the film he went into his personal nest egg to help the Rubbles with adopting Bam Bam. There's a chunk of the film where we watch Fred act like a snob, and it's not that funny. Many of the more verbal jokes do tend to fall flat, but the sight gags do get some chuckles. I like how they use the cartoon Fred in the newspapers, and the animatronic animals are well utilized. Dino looks especially good, and the decision to reuse Mel Blanc's yips was a nice touch. David Newman's score is also deserving of praise. It's great hearing the theme song in Dolby Stereo, and Newman's instrumental music captures the same sense of playfulness as Joint Curtin's work in the original series. I watched the Flintstones movie quite often when I was younger, and I do occasionally revisit it from time to time, just because it fascinates me so. But it's not a film I feel really holds up. It's the sort of film I like to call all sets, no story. They spend so much time and money on creating the production design, the costumes, and special effects to actually look like the animated series. But when it came to writing the script, the story just felt patched together. Recently, Warner Brothers announced plans to make a new animated film based on the Flintstones. It wouldn't be the first, as there was one in the 1960s where Fred became a spy. I'm curious to see what the filmmakers do with this one. These are characters in a world I have a real fondness for, and with the right story, a great Flintstones movie can certainly be made one day. See you next time.